right. All right, welcome everyone tonight to see Kathryn Grace as she talks about her book, Phonics and Spelling through Morpheme Grapheme Mapping. My name's Donna Heitmanek. I am the creator of the Facebook page, What I Should Have Learned in College, Science of Reading, What I Should Have Learned in College. And we do occasional events like this to help promote getting out the knowledge of what can help you do better in your classrooms and align more to the science of reading. So a little bit about Kathryn. She was born and raised in Vermont in a family of 9 children. As a young girl, she struggled to learn to read, often asking to stay home from school due to a stomach ache. In 4th grade, she had a gifted teacher named Mr. James, who taught to decode the elusive words on the page so she could enjoy the gift of reading. Kathryn went on to be a successful student, graduating magna cum laude while earning her Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education, her Master's in Reading and Language Arts with a concentration in Special Education, and a Certificate of Graduate Studies in Language and Learning Disabilities, which she pursued after her young son had difficulty speaking and later learning to read. While in graduate school, she was fortunate to have Dr. Moats as her faculty advisor and Dr. Reed Lyon as one of her professors. Kathryn was a public school teacher, a special educator, a learning specialist, a reading coach, literacy specialist, public school administrator, as well as an adjunct faculty at Trinity College for over 40 years. Kathryn created Phoneme Grapheme Mapping in 1983 to use with her 5th grade students who struggled to understand the alphabetic principle. By helping them match sound to print, they were able to finally make sense of an often confusing orthography. Her book, Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme Grapheme Mapping, was published in 2007 by Sopris West Educational Services and is featured in the highly acclaimed Letters program. It is currently being published by Really Great Reading in print and digital forms. Although recently retired, she continues to write, consult, tutor, and mentor classrooms and special education educators through her Learning Roots consulting business. I want to remind you that tonight is a webinar. It is unusual for us to do a webinar because we always do Zoom meetings, but I wanted to keep the noise level down. So if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. And if you want to chat, you can look through there, and I will be yes, the presentation is recorded and the PowerPoint will be shared tomorrow when I send it to you, anyone who has registered for this event. So without further ado, I am so excited to have Kathryn with us tonight. Take it away, Kathryn.
Hello, thank you for joining us. Donna says there's about 1,000 people, so that's important. I'm going to try to get this to work. There we go. Donna helped me start a Facebook page, and there's a link there. I'm hoping that people would feel free to ask questions. I get through many of the other forums I belong to, I'm always getting questions about how do you map this, how do you map that. I use some of those questions to pick and choose what I was going to discuss tonight because there's not enough time to get to everything. And the problem with a webinar is I can't pre-assess you to know whether you're beginners, moderate, or expert learners. So please bear with me, and hopefully there'll be something for everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about a historical glance at reading, putting research into practice, why word study is important, what is orthographic mapping's role in word study, how does phoneme grapheme mapping facilitate the mental process of orthographic mapping? There's a lot of confusion over what orthographic mapping is and what it isn't. Hopefully I can help you straighten that out tonight. How predictable is our language, the value of the syllable types, how can phoneme grapheme mapping be used to teach complex phonics and morphology, not just beginning phonics, and hopefully there'll be time for a question and answer period. Here's the glance. From the 1930s to 1970s, we were using a whole word approach. I'm a product of that approach. I was very successful at holding up the flashcards for the Dick and Jane series But that didn't translate to being able to read a book. I could memorize those words, but I didn't know how to decode unfamiliar words. So back then we had toward the 70s, there were SRA kits, basal readers with more of a focus on comprehension than on decoding the words. There was a lack of diverse characters in those books and a significant over-reliance on memory. And it takes a long time to change things. So that's a 40-year span. We were doing something that we now know was not very productive. In 1960, the 60s, 67, I believe, the Elkonin boxes were first used to segment words into sounds. It was not used for letters. It was only used as a placeholder for sounds. In 1983, that's when I created sound boxes and sound box mapping, and later named it Phoneme Grapheme mapping when I wrote the book, to use with struggling readers. I had many, as a classroom teacher and later as a special ed teacher, I had more boys than girls on my caseload. And many times those boys were really good in math, but not as good at reading. And I've realized that, math is always, there's a one-to-one correspondence. If I hold up 3 pencils, it's going to be 3. If I hold up 3 cats, it's going to be 3. If I hold up 3 chips, it's 3. And you can count them 1, 2, 3. There's one name for each letter. Well, it's much more complicated in reading. You can have the word at, which has 2 sounds, at, 2 letters. You can have the word ate, I ate the cake, which has 2 sounds, but 3 letters. You can have the word for the number 8 that has 2 sounds and 5 letters. And if we don't let children know that sometimes you can have more than one letter representing a sound, they go for quite a period of time trying to figure out that I hear something, I write it down. And it comes across as, oh, they know phonics, when actually they don't. They know their letter names pretty much, and that's it. So in 1985 is when Ehri started her work on orthographic mapping. She gave that name to the cognitive process of retrieving words for use in skilled reading. From the 80s to the 90s, we had whole language. Students were immersed in authentic literature, engaged in text through making personal connections. I remember the sticky notes were flying in classrooms, whereas the kids were reading a text. They had to write down their personal connections with the text. There were class read alouds, lots of big books, journals, invented spelling. What they didn't have, though, was explicit phonics. In 1986, The Simple View of Reading was first released, which talked about that word recognition plus language comprehend, when you have both decoding and language, strong reading results only when you have both decoding and language comprehension. Then you will have a true reading. People today talk about that's an oversimplified view, but it's gone through many reiterations, but it's still a good place to start. From 1990 to 2010, I began doing workshops, phoneme grapheme mapping workshops across the country. First presenting it at IDA, I believe, in 1991, I believe. And I remember bringing lots of chips in little baggies and having people move the chips around, the colored stone chips, and doing with an overhead, showing them how to map. And later on, I was asked to go to 13 different states numerous times to teach teachers how to do it. And it also became part of the Time for Teachers professional development offering at that time, which I don't know if you're familiar with Nancy Mather. She's the author of the Woodcock-Johnson assessment. She has an equivalent called Project Rhyme in Arizona. I still work with them on their new project, which is the It's comprehensive reading program that's delivered online. From the 90s to 2000, just 10 years, we had balanced literacy. People were starting to listen to the fact that, kids, there are a lot of kids getting decoding help. Can they all be disabled? Why does every child that's referred for special ed or near every child need decoding help? So the attempt was made to balance the literature and the explicit instruction. The queuing system was born, level text. In 1991, I copyrighted phoneme grapheme mapping, and it also had the titles sound spelling boxes, sound boxes for spelling, sound boxes. My original book, that's what they're called for the primary level. In 96, Dr. Ehri did her phases of word reading development, and that model has been used for both reading and spelling development to show that a reader must master phoneme grapheme mapping, or the alphabetic principle in order to be a proficient reader. In 1997, Congress said, okay, we're going to have a national reading panel to investigate all of the research that's out there to see what we need to do next. Dr. Motz, Dr. Lyon, many of the researchers that are still speaking today were on the forefront of that, trying to have teachers become more informed about the science of reading. So even though right now it's 2021, you know, we call it a science of reading movement. Some people call it a science of reading movement. It really started like in the 90s, the late 90s, sorry. So in 98, Ehri published her research on the phases of the science of sight word read learning and the mental process she called orthographic mapping for the first time. In 1990, Dr. Reed Lyon reported to Congress on the findings of the research. And as you all know, that was the National Reading Panel that we all saw in the 480-page report that concluded that systematic phonics, not whole language, was the best method for teaching beginning readers, and that phonics needed to be taught explicitly rather than through a discovery method, and not on an as-needed basis, which was being done in some popular programs such as Reading Recovery. From 2000 to the present, we've had the science of reading. Students are taught phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. According to the standards, you want to use decodable books and authentic literature. Some people still use some level text, phoneme grapheme mapping. And the biggest thing I think about what's happened since 2000 is there's been more accessibility to computers and technology. So research information spreads quickly. There's been a lot of programs put online, so they're at a keyboard touch for teachers and for students. So we've been able to accomplish more since 2000 than we have from 1930 to 2000, just I think because the help of technology has contributed so much to that. So in 2000, the National Reading Panel really ushered in this century of hope for us, because it said systematic phonics instruction makes a bigger contribution to children's growth than other programs. Teaching children to manipulate phonemes using letters produce bigger effects than teaching them without letters. Blending and segmenting instruction showed a much larger effect on reading than multiple skill instruction did. Phonological awareness training is most effective when it's taught by having children manipulating letters than just doing speech. I don't know if you remember when we first had a lot of the phonological awareness books come out, people were doing lots of poems and songs and not really relating what those were to letters as much. And the big takeaway is that performance is best when children are from the beginning directly taught the mapping of letters onto speech sounds. Regardless of their social background, children who do not learn this suffer from reading delays. So this is how letters became about. Dr. Motz worked for Dr. Lyon at the National Institute of Health during the reading panel time, and she started doing research on teacher knowledge and really realized, where can people get this knowledge all in one place? So she put together the letters program, and the original letters was published in 2003. I copyrighted phoneme grapheme mapping in 1991, and I remember going to, I think it was 2001 when I did it for the first time at IDA, and I remember sitting with Louisa at a cafe, and I had jelly packets and sugar packets and showing her how to manipulate phonemes and writing using making boxes on a napkin to explain to her how I was doing phoneme grapheme mapping. She ended up using that. I contracted with Sopris West, which was her publisher, and created the book Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme Grapheme Mapping. Dr. Deb of Morpheme Magic was my editor, and a wonderful one at that. And in 2005, Louisa redid letters, and she put phoneme grapheme mapping in there, and it's used in their breakout modules to train teachers today. So I presented in 2006 at the National Letters Institute and trained the trainers in phoneme grapheme mapping. And some of those names I think you'll recognize because they are contributing both publication programs and research. Susan Hall, Deb Glazier, Linda Farrell, Judy Dodson, Carol Tolman, who's actually the co-author of Letters now. I'm noticing I have a spelling mistake there, sorry. So Louisa, the Letters is in its 3rd edition, and I know that people are disappointed that it can't be delivered individually anymore, but I think it's a matter of numbers. It takes a long time to train facilitators in this information and make sure that they, are going to be doing it well enough to cover the mass number of people who want to take it. There are some, as you've been reading in the forum, there are some other good choices instead of when it gets released again to the general public. So why is word study important? Because having knowledge about how English words are spelled, we call orthography, informs our teaching of phonics. When I test a kid, I can look at their writing and tell you what phonics rules they don't know. A child's spelling provides a window into his understanding of that language. It should include the teaching of phonics, spelling, and vocabulary, the correlation between spelling and reading comprehension. And there's been lots of research about that recently. And in the past 2 decades, it's very high. And you can use spelling and reading can be reciprocal relationships to teach. Writers who struggle with spelling often limit themselves to words they can spell, so you don't often see, what actually their verbal talent is. And non-automatic spelling and memorization drains the attention that kids need for the planning and the generating ideas and the formulation of sentences for the writing process. The writing process is the most taxing of any linguistic process we have, because it demands a lot of attention and a lot of organization and pulling in, what you know about reading, spelling, language, all in one. So what is orthographic mapping's role in word study? Well, spelling of words, as you know, are retained in memory when their letters are bonded to the phonemes in the syllables, not bonded to an entire visual picture. I don't know if I remember when I was teaching in the 80s, I think, when everybody had key rings, and the kids they'd learn a word and it would get stuck on their key ring, and then their paraeducator or their parent would go through those words like flashcards, but there wasn't any discussion about the sounds in those words. It was so kids who had great memories did well. Kids who had poor memories didn't do so well. So all words, when practiced enough, can be read from memory by sight. That is not the same as memorizing words. It means that you have the phoneme grapheme connection that you put in your brain that then helps you retrieve it later. It is not, it's considered a sight word because it's learned through other ways, and you recognize it by sight because you have figured out those phoneme grapheme relationships, not because you learned that word through memorization. Many practitioners have limited their definition of sight words to high frequency or irregularly spelled words, but Ehri says that all words when practiced become read from memory by sight. This is the biggie. Orthograph, I see on Teachers Pay Teachers, many products that are saying orthographic mapping, but orthographic mapping occurs in the brain. It does not occur with pencil and paper. Phoneme grapheme mapping and grapheme phoneme mapping, the reciprocal process, those occur with chips and paper and pencil. But orthographic mapping is the imprinting that happens on your brain through using phoneme grapheme mapping. I think we're doing a disservice to teachers if we don't use those two terms correctly. The units for orthographic mapping can be phonemes, syllables, or morphemes in speech, or single graphemes or larger spelling patterns in print. You know, it depends on each individual. You know, I mean, I think in the beginning, little kids are probably remembering in, it, in. After they've seen enough times, they might then remember the syllable in to help them read pin and sin and fin. So I think it's a continuum of their learning, whether they use the phoneme, the syllable, the grapheme. But at least if they're taught it, they have a choice. Because when we were just dealing with sight words and kids weren't taught decoding skills, the pyramid was they know the word by sight. If they didn't, where did they go? This way, if you see the word and you don't recognize it by sight, you can go to phoneme analysis and then phoneme grapheme analysis to syllables. And one of those will help you get the word into your memory if you've been taught those skills. As the spellings of words enter memory through the orthographic memory, they also influence the phonological processing of words, phonological memory, and vocabulary. One of the big reasons many kids have trouble remembering words and remembering phonics concepts is because they don't have good phonological awareness. I can't tell you how many children I have assessed, whether they are 4th graders, 8th graders, college graduates, that when they have trouble spelling or decoding long words, it's because they never developed phonemic segmentation skills and the knowledge of the alphabetic principle. They have been doing it all by memorization. Dr. Kilpatrick says, orthographic memory mapping is not a skill, teaching technique, or activity you can do with students. But you can do phonemic awareness tasks and teach phonics, because those greatly facilitate the brain's orthographic mapping of the word. Since we learn to speak long before we learn to read, little kids already have a lot of sounds in their vocabulary and words in their vocabulary that can help to store them in long-term memory. A written word is turned into a sight word through the orthographic mapping by attaching those sounds to the word's pronunciation and to their sequence, so it can be stored in the brain and retrieved later, and also be retrieved for use with other words. I spoke to Dr. Ehri this year, I think it was like in February, because she was looking over a paper I was writing, and she's a very wonderful lady, by the way, very gracious. And just as she said, I said, so when do you think it occurs? She says, when you teach children to decode, orthographic mapping occurs. When you teach children to analyze grapheme phoneme relationship within words to determine how those spellings map to their pronunciations, that it occurs. When you teach them to remember the spelling of words by remembering how phonemes are represented by the graphemes within the word, you're teaching them to, okay, I went backwards to minute. This is the schema that, after talking to her several times, I came up with, and she did look at this. And if you look at, I'll try to point here, we have orthographic mapping. If you see it as the large umbrella, okay, in the brain, it's the brain umbrella, okay? And in that, it can be described as the brain activity that involves parts of the brain that connect phonemes and graphemes. And we have it's a two-way street. The grapheme phoneme mapping, okay, from the print to the sound is decoding. The sound to the print is spelling direction. So it's a two-way street, but both of them can lead to orthographic mapping. I know there's a lot of discussion right now about speech to print and print to speech. You actually need both. It's not one necessarily so much better than the other. It's how you're teaching it and if you're connecting the two. Proficient phonemic awareness skills facilitate orthographic mapping. Having automatic letter sound associations facilitate orthographic mapping. The alphabet, a knowledge of the alphabetic principle, which these two things will lead to, help with orthographic mapping. Understanding that one sound can be represented by one letter or more than one letter is very important for kids when they're trying to map words and sounds. So an effective word study program also facilitates orthographic mapping. So what does an effective word study program need to have? It should help students make connections between what they hear and what they see or write. So those patterns can be orthographically mapped in the brain. It should include tasks that build phonemic awareness. It should teach letter sound correspondences to automaticity. And it should help students understand the alphabetic principle, which is, again, I can't say this enough, a letter or group of letters can represent individual sounds. And there might not always be a one-to-one correspondence between what you hear and what you write. Includes both phoneme to grapheme and grapheme to phoneme correspondences, and it enables a child to read and spell individual words accurately and quickly so they can retrieve them later. I believe that phonics and spelling through phoneme grapheme mapping is a good word study program. I first wrote it, I told you, in I think it was 1993, but it wasn't published till 2003, and then 2007. And Dr. Motes wrote the foreword, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but she basically says at that time that this program, fully tested and theoretically sound, exploits a fundamental fact about the relationship between speech and print. The 44 speech sounds in English are represented by graphemes, not letters. Kathryn's innovative and effective approach highlights phoneme grapheme relationships, depicting for students the internal details, which you're going to see today, of both spoken words and written words. It embodies the meaning of alphabetic principle. And she actually gave me the okay to use the same foreword in the next edition of my book. And she said, I don't think there's anything I would change, Kathy, about it. So that was good to hear. So what is phoneme grapheme mapping? Facilitates orthographic mapping, incorporates the phoneme grapheme phonemic. It allows kids to make connections. It's sequential, systematic, multisensory. It supports automaticity, and it helps kids and teachers actually become more metacognitive about the phonics they use. When I was teaching the time for teachers class, one whole day, and I'm going to do this in an hour with you, one whole day was spent on phonics and phoneme grapheme mapping. And so many teachers would say to me, I didn't learn to read that way. How my life would have been so much easier if I had learned how to do that. And they didn't know the rules, but by teaching them phoneme grapheme mapping, they were learning the rules. And I think by having our universities focus on having teachers actually do some of these things in their classes, we will have better teachers, because none of us teach what we don't know. 40 years ago, I couldn't have taught you this because I hadn't learned it all. Well, no, I have. But when I was 20, I couldn't have taught you this because I didn't know it. As I've gotten more knowledgeable, I can now teach it. And that's what we're going for with the science of reading movement, is to make teachers knowledgeable so they can feel comfortable to teach us information. Of course, we get the naysayers who say, why are you teaching phonics? It's not predictable. Our language is crazy. There's too many rules. There's actually not so many rules. There's a lot of patterns. There's only 4 or 5 rules, like doubling, change the Y to I. When do you use CH, TCH? There's some spelling rules, but the rest are patterns. This English spelling system isn't crazy or unpredictable. Motes verified this in '95, and the IDA came out with it again in 2011, which I show here. It says it can be taught as a system that makes sense. 50% of English words are predictable based on sound letter correspondences. An additional 37% are predictable except for one sound, like in knit and boat, rain, boat, goat. Only other information, such as the language that comes, of the words that come from other languages, like spaghetti from Italian and grill spelled with an E from France, we get other languages that impact us. Only 4% of English words are truly irregular and need to be memorized. And those are the words that people have started calling heart words, which we'll talk about. later. This is a chart that was done by, it was taken from speech to print by Louisa. The chart wasn't taken from there. I created the chart, but Louisa reported on this information. And if you look at the light green, 50% of the words in our language, and there are 325,000 words. Okay, now you're going to say, nah, there's more words in that. I'm talking about base words, because obviously play is a word. Played, player, playing, plays, all those are words where suffixes have been added, but base words, root words, there's that many words. So if you look at these, if you teach kids beginning and initial consonants, short vowels, digraphs, beginning and final blends, they can read 50% of the words they see, just with those few concepts. Another 36%, so that's another 225,000 words, can be gotten by the position of a word in a phoneme in a word. Think long vowel patterns. If you hear long A in the middle of a word, it's spelled AI or A silent E most of the time. If you hear it at the end of the word, it's probably AY. If you hear it at the end of a syllable, it's probably going to be an open A. Also, soft C and G. That relates to phonemic environment. What are the vowels that follow that C? That predicts how you're going to say that word. The C sound is going to say K, or it's going to say S, or it's going to say G or J. Depends on the vowel that follows it. We have predictable but infrequent. Some people call them word families or word relatives, like kind, mind, blind, old, fold, mold. The little rule, you can have one vowel followed by two consonants. The vowel can, but not always, be long. That's included in this 36%. They're morphologically sensitive words, compound words, affix root structure, the derivations, rule-based, foreign words. That's about 10%. And only 4% are the ones that are left over from our Anglo-Saxon heritage. For example, of. Do you know where of comes from? It actually came from the word off. The child of Kathryn is the child off Kathryn. The word one comes from the word own, O-N. It was originally pronounced long O, like in the word alone and loan and only. So some of those words, even though they're heart words, actually have their roots in their derivations. So these are the Dolch words. And if you know, there's 220 of them. If I had time today, I would have you, and if I could see you, I would have you go down this list and circle any words that you didn't think were phonetically predictable. Most of the time, it's going to come out to be about 88% or so. Okay, and overall, it may be 4 to 9% of the words that are truly what we would call heart words. So do these words, but now let's talk about heart words for a minute, okay? Because I've seen a lot of people put hearts under parts of a word that actually are patterns, or they are predictable, or there's a group of words that fit that pattern. Now, I know that if you're teaching kindergarten or first grade, you may do that because they haven't learned that sound yet. I understand that, but I think we need to tell kids that we haven't learned this yet, but there's a bunch of other words that are going to be like this. For example, walk, want, and wall. In English language, if you have an A after a W, the A will sound like aw. And in my book, it's set up like this, where for teachers, it's easy to use. There's a tutorial. The tutorial is, what does the teacher need to know to be able to teach this lesson to their kids? When the vowel letters A or O are preceded by a W in a word or syllable, the sound of the vowel may be other than the short or long vowel sound generally associated with that letter. The generalization helps explain why many common words in which W is followed by A or O do not contain the expected short vowel sound. That's for you. This is what you say to kids. It says, teach. When you see the vowel letters A or O after a W in a word or syllable, the sound may not be the short O or long sound usually made by those letters. Okay. And then there's a tutorial down here. Oh, this is for the next one, understanding consonants, because the next page is about consonants. And then I give you a word list. And if I was to show you the other pages, there would be mapping examples for the word list, which we will see in a few minutes on another lesson. So let's make this case for predictability. Short vowels, initial and final consonants, I already told you that, are predictable and consistent. It allows kids to get 50% of the words, allows children to read and write 50% of the most common words. 3,000 words in our language will cover 95% of what people see in everyday writing and common text and speech, like newspapers, blogs, books, movies. Just the first 1,000 out of the first 3,000 words are used in 89% of everyday writing. So for us to have kids who are not reading at all by 3rd or 4th grade, which I had 2 years ago, and he'd been in special ed since preschool and he still wasn't reading at grade 4, then we're doing something wrong, because we know that 89% of them can be predictable. And this child's verbal IQ was 124. So, but his visual perception was very low, and he was being taught a sight word method. So we need to look at not just what we're teaching, how we're teaching, and who we're teaching it to. And that's the value of a good evaluation, because if you have a kid with high verbal skills, most likely they're going to be able to learn a language-based structured language program like phonics. So what's the alphabetic principle? The sounds plus the letters equal the alphabetic principle. The sounds you hear may be represented by one or more letters to create the sounds in our language. English has a complex orthography. In other words, what we see, the letters we see are complex. We have 40 phonemes represented by just 26 letters. Those 26 letters combine in all kinds of ways to create more than 250 graphemes. A grapheme is a letter or a letter group. And again, there's not always a one-to-one correspondence. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 sounds in yellow and 6 letters. This is what you need to make sure kids understand. And they don't always understand that just by reading. They need that phonemic awareness mapping activity for them to visually see it. Motes came up with the 5 principles of English orthography in 2002. We spell with letters and letter combinations. We do not spell phonetically. I put this slide up here because as a learning specialist, when a child got referred to me and you have your evaluation team meeting, the teachers would say, he doesn't need phonics. He already spells phonetically. He doesn't need phonics. Well, he spells phonetically because that's what he hears, but he doesn't know phonics because phonics is where you bridge what you hear to what you write. We spell by the position and a sound in a word. I told you that, AY at the end, AI in the middle. We spell by letter patterns. For example, J and V will never end a word. Some letters are never doubled. We spell by meaning. You might not be able to remember how to spell courage, but if you think of courageous, you can hear that part of the word that's difficult. The same with health. You can't really hear the vowel team in health, but in heal you can. Many English words and spelling patterns come from other languages. Why are we going to teach syllables? Recently, depending on what forum I'm reading, you're having people say, we shouldn't teach syllables. You know, there's too much, you don't always use them. You know, if you teach kids the smaller units, they can eventually put them all together. Well, I want to just bring up that syllable naming does not equal syllable understanding. Being able to memorize that one consonant after a short vowel is a closed syllable does not know that the child knows how to make that short vowel in that word or the sound of the consonant that comes after it. So we need to be careful that we're not just teaching the labels of the syllables, but we're teaching what their purpose is and the sounds within them. More than 80% of the words in English have more than one syllable. Recognizing the vowel pattern, I call it a syllable type is a vowel pattern. Makes it easier to decode and spell that word. It's much easier to read a new unfamiliar word in chunks They're easier to hold on to than lots of small bits of information. It's easier and more accurate to spell a longer word if you try to spell it in those chunks. When I was teaching, and I was teaching syllables to my students, I would give them, when we were doing multisyllabic words, their spelling test would be graded according to the syllables they got correct. So if the word was remaking, and they spelled re correct and ing correct, and maybe put an E on make, they would get 2/3 of that word correct. So it was a way of asking them to use syllables, but also helping them realize that it wasn't the whole word you got wrong, it was the piece of that word. Syllables are especially important for children who struggle with reading and spelling as they progress through their education, especially where science and social studies come into play. They will need syllables. And that's, I know Donna told you I didn't learn to read till 4th grade. My birthday's in the summer, so that's, I was 9. But where it really showed up is I could fake my way through reading class, but I couldn't fake my way through science and social studies, where I couldn't read those big words. So my older sister is 15 years older than me, and she was a mom when I was 9 years old, and I would get sick around lunchtime, and they would get hold of her to come get me, and I'd miraculously be better by the end of the day. And it was because I had those content areas in the afternoon and I wasn't feeling very successful in them. So when kids are avoiding things, you might want to check to see what exactly subject they're avoiding. So what do we know about a syllable? A syllable is a unit of sound that contains one or more letters that creates a vowel sound, one vowel sound. A vowel pattern can be recognized by its syllable type. I have watched teachers say, when they explain what a syllable is to a child, a syllable is a group of letters that has a vowel sound, okay? The number of vowels in a word does not equal the number of syllables in a word. You want to make sure that you don't say it's a group of letters that, excuse me, I'm very tired. You want to make sure that they understand that there's only one vowel sound. Even if there's 2 letters, they can have one vowel sound. It's the vowel sound that creates the syllable, not the number of letters or the number of vowels in a word. Because that's what the teachers would say. A syllable has a vowel, and it's not a vowel, it's a vowel sound that they have. These are the 6 syllable types. I'm not going to go over them with you because I'm pretty sure you probably have been exposed to them, but there are only 6 specific ones. And then within that, you can add 6 more, because there can be a closed schwa syllable, an open schwa syllable, a silent E schwa syllable, a vowel-team schwa syllable, R-controlled schwa syllable, and a consonant LE syllable. In other words, any syllable type can have a schwa in it. What is the most common syllable type in English? It's closed, a closed syllable. It accounts for about 50% of the syllables in running text. And short vowels, initial and final consonants, blends, and digraphs are both consistent and predictable. That's what makes up a closed syllable. It contains just one vowel that's almost always short. Okay, I showed you the Dolch list of 220 words. How many of you are familiar with the 100 most common words found in children's reading and writing? I prefer to use this. Because I want kids to get the most bang for their buck. And what I did is I arranged the words by syllable type. And I want you to notice how many of those 100 words are closed syllables. And then the fewer are open, silent E, vowel team, are controlled. So we can teach those words by syllable type. So if you're going to do a lesson on closed syllables, short A, you should use these words, because those are going to give you the most bang for the buck. Does it have a heart? These are the words that are irregular in nature, okay? But even within those heart words, once kids get to a certain linguistic understanding, they can be grouped. For example, did you know that words like who, do, and to, there's a small group of open syllables that end in the letter O that make the oo sound? Did you know that Old English U was replaced with an O because the scribes often didn't quite close the U up, so it started looking like an O? So that's why done, from, come, some, they sound like but they're an O. In English spelling, we have no words in N and V. That's why the E is there. And I explained to you why of is based on the meaning of off. An A before an L tends to be pronounced as ah, as in hot. An O may say long O when it's followed by two consonants. Now, not just O, I mean, we know that I when followed by two consonants can be long I too, but remember, these are just those 100 words. Here's one and once, they're related to only, and these are two words that have a short U, and if we could add another, the word another there too. This was adapted from the 100 words list from Oxford Dictionaries, and it was done several years ago, but they just updated it and the words didn't change. They're still the 100 most frequent words in writing, reading and writing. Phoneme grapheme mapping starts with sound. Okay, it's very important that we use the right kind of short vowels, keywords. I've seen people send me lap charts lately, and some of them still are using Indian or umbrella. We don't want to use those because they have nasalized sounds. Elephant begins with the letter L. Igloo, some kids hear an E, a short E in that word. So what I choose to use is these, which I know Wilson, many others have them. And what I do with this is I have kids actually pull vowels. So they're going to be looking at the word apple. And can you put your hand out in front of your mouth? I can't see if you're doing this or not. I mean, out in front of you like I am. And I want you to start to say the word apple. And you're going to pull your hand closer to you and you're going to swallow the end of it. So it's going to be again, and you want, this is to help the kids get the sound to the brain. You do the same for octopus. Itch, itch, echo. And I have the kids use this chart for a while, and I'll say, what sound does this make? What sound does this make? And they'll use the picture and the cues to do that. And then slowly they get so they know them. And then if they happen to mess up on a short I, all I have to do is scratch their arm. So there's some value in that multi-sensory part to that. I'm going to speed things up a little bit because we're not going to have time to do it all. I do a matching game with this. So I try to use words that have the vowel sounds at the beginning. I would teach 2 at a time, and then eventually, so like these would have all been covered. And I would say, what vowel do you hear at the beginning of Ichabod? What vowel would you hear at the beginning of ad? What vowel would you hear at the beginning of ugly? Okay. If you have it at the front rather than in the middle, like in bed, bad, bit, it doesn't have those explosive sounds at the front when you're first trying to practice these sounds. Okay, so how do we do phoneme grapheme mapping? Phoneme grapheme mapping, you start with sound. So in the word at, what do you hear? Show me the sounds in at. Red is a vowel, yellow is a consonant. So t. What do I hear? Touch and say. At. What do I write? What do I say? What do I write? A. What do I say? T. What do I write? T. Okay, down below, the next one is odd. What do I hear? Whoop. Odd. What do I write? The first phoneme is ah. What do I write? O. The second phoneme is d. What do I write? D. Now with little kids, I say, what do I hear? What do I write? With older kids, we talk about phoneme and grapheme. Phoneme is the smallest unit of sound. A telephone is something you hear from. Grapheme is the smallest unit of print. An autograph is something you write. We talk about those two things. That's in the book, the lessons on that. Oops. We have consonant oddity QU. That represents two sounds, k and w. Okay. In other languages, though, the Q actually says k, like in Iraq and Qatar. It's only in our language where we have this very unique partnership. Again, I'm going to speed this up. We're going to do quit. What do I hear? I hear k, I, t. A child might ask. Okay, there's a U there, which is a vowel, but why does it have a consonant block? Because in this word, it's not acting like a consonant. So what do you hear? K. What do you write? Q. What do you hear? What do you write? Why are they circled? Because they're a partnership. In our language, you do not see one without the other. What do you hear? I. What do you hear? T. Okay. Quack. What do you hear? K. I have the kids, when they move these, touch them and say them so that I know that they're associating the right sound with the right block. If you don't have them do that, they might pull down the blocks but not have the sounds right, and then it will look very different. So it's very important that, and it also helps with the segmenting. So what do I hear? What do I write? What do I hear? What do I write? What do I hear? What do I write? Why is CK in one box? Because it makes one sound. Consonant oddity X. X can say gz and it can say ks. Okay. It makes two sounds, so we put it across two boxes. I discovered this on the internet today, and it's actually published by a pretty reputable publishing company. What's wrong with this? X does say z, but in, I believe, less than 10 words. And X-ray, by doing it at the beginning, what's the first sound you hear in X? Eh. You hear a short E. A better keyword would be fox. Say fox without fa. You get ks. I tell kids to do, we do this. Say the word axe. Axe. So what does it say? Axe. They make an X with their hands with the two sounds. So they know that each limb of the X stands for a sound. Whoop. When it does that, it won't let me go forward. Okay, so how do we map these? I'm just going to, again, do a very quick one. For fox, we get, whoop, wrong color. Whoop. Stay up till 4 in the morning finishing this. Okay, fox, fox. So what do I write? I hear F, I write F, I hear ah, and then I hear ks, and it's across two boxes. I want to do the word axle because these are the sounds a, k, s, ul. And how do we print it? A, k, s, ul. LE is a schwa syllable. How would you divide the word axle into syllables? Would you agree that consonant, this is a consonant LE syllable, the second syllable is a consonant LE syllable? But if I put the X with the LE, that becomes axle, right? Axle, because that becomes an open syllable. The reason that's tricky is because the K, the K, actually goes with the ak, and the S part goes with the S So it has a role when dividing syllables. So what I would do when I have kids do syllables on phoneme grapheme mapping paper, and I don't have them do that until after they're pretty solid with phoneme grapheme mapping alone, they would color these two boxes one color, and they would color these two boxes another color to show that where they were divided. Soft C and G is another tricky one for people. I created this song in 1983 in my classroom, and it goes like this. There are three letters that soften C, E-I-E-I-Y. The same three often soften G, E-I-E-I-Y. With a s here and a ch there, here a s there, ch everywhere. Ch. And if you'll notice, there's a very important word, little word in there. The same three often soften G. Why is that word important? Because in the word get, GE should say J, but it doesn't, right? In the word, no, it doesn't, Jen. I'm trying to think of another one. Give, it should say jiv, and it doesn't. There's some exceptions to that rule. So that's why the word often is there. This song is used in the letters program. I'm going to skip some of the easier ones I was going to do with you. I do want to show you biscuit and faced. Biscuit, the sounds in biscuit are B, I, S, K, I, T. Do you agree? How do we map that? What's that U doing in there? Does anybody know what that U is doing in there? If that U wasn't in there, how would I have to say that word? Bisset. Right? Because the C would be next to the I. So the U is a placeholder to keep the C away from the I. It happens in the word guy too. The U is in that. If it wasn't, you'd have GY next to each other and it would say jai. So sometimes U can be a placeholder. I'm going to cover the faced one on a new slide in a minute, so you'll see that. I'll do that one. Whoop. Sorry. Got it. This is done on a smart board, so it's the reason I have to manipulate it this way is because it doesn't work if I do it in PowerPoint. Is CK a digraph? That's a common question I see on the forum. People argue over CK being a digraph or not. Well, let's look at what a digraph is. A digraph is, it can be two or more consonant letters, actually, two consonant letters that when put together stand for a sound that is entirely different from either of the letters. So sh does not say s, ch does not say k, ph does not say p, but in ck, k, it's not a digraph because it makes one of the sounds that's in the letter in it, actually in both of them in that case. We'll do, okay, if we did flocks, I'm just going to show you what that looks like mapped. The pH goes in one box, the X goes in two. All these lessons are explained in my book. Everyone that I'm showing you. The digraph NG. This is, I know that I disagree with several publishers and people about this, and I just think it's something that needs to be discussed. I find that a digraph can be confusing for kids in, the digraph NG can be confusing for kids in early elementary. Some programs teach ing as a welded sound, but there's more than one sound in ing. There are two sounds in ing, I, ng. Ang has two sounds, a, ng. So I don't know if it should be called a welded pattern, welded sounds. They're not really welded because they don't always stick together. And when you tell kids they always should stick together, they spell like this. Sang is S-A-I-N-G. Rang is R-A-I-N-G. Suing looks like this. Okay. I mean, sung looks like this, sorry. Also, when they go to read, they want to keep the ing together, so they'll read bingo like bingo. They'll read boing as boing. Young is young. And angel as angle. So we have to be very careful about what that label is and be sure to teach it as its unique sound. I'm going to, instead of mapping, because I think you probably have the idea of how this works now, this is what length looks like. I'm speeding up because it's 8 o'clock. There's a lot left here. So the digraph NG can be also spelled with an N. And that we never see these 3 letters together, an N, G, and K. Kids will try to spell think like this because they hear that think. Before a hard G or a hard K, an N makes a sound. Okay, in the word bank, we get B. Ah, whoops, that didn't stay, did it? B, ah, right? So, one more. So this would be a B, an A, an N, and a K, even though they hear an here. What do you hear? What do you write would be the N. For bingo, okay, I have seen kids would put NGGO here. And they want to divide, and when you go to divide it, it's even worse because it would be bing-o if you retain the N and G together. It's divided right here because this says bingo. Okay, blends. A blend is comprised of 2 or 3 consonants that are adjacent to each other. When I teach blending, I start with sounds. And if there's 2 sounds in your mouth, you're going to feel them. Say the word flat. Close your eyes and say the word flat. Say flat without at. How many movements did you feel in your mouth? 2. You should have seen at the beginning in front of your mouth, and then your tongue should have gone up for the ul. Say fat without at. How many movements in your mouth? So when I introduce blends, I start with the sound part of it, practicing how it feels in your mouth, how it is differentiated between a word with just a single consonant and a word with a blend before we start talking about what it looks like. Okay, again, I'm skipping this because I spent too much time on the other things. Versatile Y is in my book, and Y has many jobs. It can say at the beginning of a word or syllable is the only time it says you, but yet we wait to show the kids the other times that it says a sound. 4 out of the 5 times it says a vowel. Do any of you watch Wheel of Fortune? I'm going to write to him because he always says that he treats Y as a consonant, never as a vowel. There'll be some Y's left in the puzzle and the Y's will be used as a vowel, and he will say the vowels are all gone. So even on national TV, we have people confusing that concept of when Y can be a vowel. Just going to show you type. What do we hear? T. What do we write? What do we hear? I. What do we write? In this case, Y. Type. The silent E does not get its own box because we don't hear it. Okay. I'm feeling Donna. Do you want me to keep going for finishing this up? It's
Yes, we have an hour and a half scheduled, so you
oh,
can
okay. I thought it was
keep
an hour and
going.
15. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't know that. Okay, so what about the busy silent E? For mapping, it has many jobs. And I think this is what another reason that puts phoneme grapheme mapping apart from many other programs that are using it, because it shows the intricate relationships between the jobs of certain letters. So E can be a 1-job E. It makes the vowel before it long, as in cake, ache, like. It makes the soft C or G. It shows the final S or Z as part of the root and not the suffix. It prevents V from being alone. It can be a placeholder in a consonant LE syllable. It can also have two jobs. It can make the first vowel long and soften a C or G. It can make the first vowel long and show that the S or sound is part of the root, as in bass, rise, and doze. It can make the first vowel long and keep the V from being the last letter in the word. It can be part of a vowel team and help make the first vowel long. It can make the vowel in the base word long and be part of the past tense ED. Three jobs is when it makes the vowel long, softens a C or G, and has a suffix that has an E in it. Then there's, of course, the no job E. And that credit should go to Romuald Spalding, who came up with that term in 1986. And some words just, we don't need it in English. They don't do anything at all, like as in the word are, were, and there. It doesn't change the vowel sound. It's just there, probably related to its when it was created in Latin, or in Latin probably. And then we have borrowed words from other languages like grill, hoard, and plaque. And the E is added there because they don't want to make sure that you don't pronounce the final consonant that we're also good at in the English language. So I'm going to show you some of these jobs for busy silent E. Cake. What do we hear? Whoop. What's the next phoneme? A. The next phoneme. K. Okay. I'm switching it up to say Phoneme Grapheme for you. What's the first phoneme in cake? K. What's the first grapheme? C. What's the next phoneme in cake? A. What's the next grapheme? A. What's the next phoneme in cake? K. What's the final grapheme in cake? And it's a K. And the E has a job. What's its job? It makes the A say its name. So there's an arrow that goes from the E to the A to make it say its name. Let's look at the word raced. Let me see which word this is. Yeah, we're gonna look at the word raced. Okay, what are the sounds in raced? R, A, S, T. 4 sounds, 5 letters. And that E is very busy in this word. What do we hear? R. What do we write? What do we hear? A. What do we write? What do we hear? S. What do we write? What do we hear? What do we hear? T. And what do we write? In this case, the A makes the vowel say its name. It softens the C, and it works with the suffix ed. Why? I've seen some people put the E with the C. Why do you think I do not do that? ED has meaning. It means past tense. So I'll try to keep the meaning units together and loop them the other way. Okay. Okay. Hugest. This is a hard one. Okay. Let's see how many of you can get this. Hugest. The first sound is. The second sound is y. The next sound is oo. The next sound is, I'm trying to think. Yeah, oh, that's it. Yeah. J. The next sound is eh. And then s. T. We have 6 letters in the word hugest. How many phonemes in the word hugest? 7. Where did the extra one come from? See, this is where I would love to see you or hear you. Okay, what's the first phoneme? What do we write? What's the second phoneme? Say huge without. Say huge without. you get huge. Say huge without j, you get u. The letter of the alphabet, U, has two phonemes in its name when it says that. It says y, u. The first part is Y and U, okay? Y, U. So it goes across two boxes because it takes two, it's made up of two sounds. And then we get the J sound. It's made with a G and an E. Okay, huge. But why? But the E actually says ah in the suffix est. Oops, I'm off my cart thing here. Okay, so this E makes the U say its name, U, which is two phonemes. It makes the G say J, and it's part of this entire suffix est. So this is what sets phoneme grapheme mapping apart, because it goes through all the phonics principles, even the more difficult ones, and it lets kids show you their understanding. It lets you see how they are metacognitively putting words together, that they know that that E has more than one job. They know what it can do in reading, and they know what it needs to do in spelling and for meaning. Okay. In my book, I have several pages on long vowels. I take each long vowels as a unit with all the spellings on it. This chart is in my book, and it came initially was done by Wilson Anderson, who gave me permission to remake it a little bit and use it. But kids, I believe kids need a chart to do this. There's over 38 ways to spell the long vowels. That's a lot to remember. So by having a chart and teaching them how to use a chart like this, you're giving them a better chance at being able to remember those spellings over time. Because the more they look at the chart and the more they use the chart, the more they'll be building up the orthographic mapping and the orthographic memory and to remember them. So when I start with kids, I would have covered up all of these others. If I'm introducing long A, okay, I would have had a white sheet of paper, cover everything up except the A strip. And I'd show them how to use the chart. These are the spellings. This is how you spell it if you hear it, when you hear it at the end of a syllable, like in an open syllable. This is how you spell it in the middle of a base word. And I want you to notice there's two that are frequently used, two spellings usually in the middle. This is what you hear at the end of a base word. And these purple ones, pink purple ones, are not used very much. I might, when I create a spelling list for kids, I will have some of these words on here that they are the more frequent words, but I will not do an entire lesson on these because it's most important that they get these first. So how do we do this? I'm going to say a word, and I want you to tell me where you hear the long A sound in that word. So the first word is grain. Where is the A sound in grain? G, R, A, N. It's not at the beginning. It's not at the end. It's not perfectly in the middle, but it's in the middle. Okay, so I would have the kids put their chip here. They hear it in the middle. What are the two choices for in the middle? A silent E or AI. There's a parentheses missing here. AI is usually used if it's followed by an N or an L. If the long A sound is followed by an N or an L. Rail, pale, male, grain, brain, train, drain. Not always, but it's a good way to start. So the kids would say, oh, long A, it's got to be one of these two. Because I hear an N at the end, it's right there. Okay, so once we, the word playing, now I'm going to try to trick you. The word is playing. Where do you hear the long A sound? It's in the middle of the word, but it's at the end of the base word. So I might say to the kids, playing. What's the base word of playing? Play. Where do you hear the long A? I hear it at the end of a base word. What's my frequent choice? AY. So you'd introduce each one of these rows like that as you're doing a lesson. And then we spend time spelling words with this and practicing segmenting those. So that's just a very quick way to do that. The most difficult one was the one that we just did, where I gave you hugest. Whoops, actually, I'm going to go back a minute. If you notice, long U is on here twice, because long U can say y, oo, where it's two phonemes, or it can say just plain oo, which is the second sound in that, okay? So say ruby without B, roo. Say roo without oo. This is a deletion activity. You know, kids are going to do long vowels, maybe the end is second, beginning of third, but I want you to be aware, I'm still doing some phonemic awareness deletion activities. I'm still using phonological awareness because our language begins with sound and you still need it to be able to manipulate some of this. For the word use without z, you. Ooh, you can hear, if you hear the word you, and then it's the two sounds. And here they are. I have Unifix cubes that I have the kids put together and pull apart when we're doing this activity. So they'll have one with just, they'll have a yellow one and a red one for the vowel, and they can stick it together when it says you and pull it apart when it just says ooh, ooh. So if you look at this one, Ruby, it's just saying ooh there, it gets one box. But if it makes two sounds like in use, it goes across two boxes. This E would have a line through it because you don't hear it. It doesn't get its own box. The only one I'm going to do here is few. But that, because it's a vowel team, few, say few without you. It makes the y-oo sound. So it goes across two boxes. So you'd have to have the kids create a box to go across those two boxes, because you don't want them to put an E in this box and a W in this box, because it takes two boxes to say the U sound. I'm overemphasizing those, trying not to put a schwa on them, but it's hard when I want you to get that. Okay. We're almost done here. Phoneme Grapheme mapping also has a complete unit on morphology. And I wanted to do a couple that people have asked about. One of them is the suffix ure. It's a noun suffix of action, result, and instrument. And it occurs a lot in words that are loaned from French and Latin, like pressure and legislature. A little history on the TU. Do you know why TU says ch? Okay. It's actually it's an Anglo-Saxon sound, I believe. And I'm hoping that my former paraeducator, Frances Anderson, is listening tonight, because she's from Scotland. And she proved my point that she was having a tuna sandwich for lunch one day, because in Scottish, they pronounce the TU as ch. And that's how it's pronounced in these words. TU says ch. So if you look at future, you get you, here we go again. You, here's because it's saying you, to you, ch, right? Y, ch, Why is that yellow? Because y and the u is a consonant. I'm sure you've seen kids spell the word use, Y-O-U-S. Maybe they even remember the E. It's because they're hearing that letter U. So what do we hear? What do I, whoops, try to get to move here. Can't get it to move. Can't get it to move, sorry. I'll try to. Well, I can't get, maybe. I can't get the blue thing to move, but basically I'll tell you what it says. Maybe it'll let me now. It wouldn't be one of these lessons if you I can't get it to do it. Basically, this would be F, U, no, excuse me, F, the U would be over these two. Okay. T, U-R-E with a line through the E is what that would be. Just do not get why that's doing that. I'm going to try to go back and see if I can. Worked, didn't it, Donna, earlier? I can't get it to do anything.
It did. I could attest to that.
I can't even get it to move now. I think maybe my computer's frozen. I'm gonna have to escape. Let's hope we can come back. Nope. Okay, let's try.
I think we're good.
Okay, yeah, I do too. I don't understand why it's not going. I'm gonna have to advance to this one. Okay, here's another suffix people are frequently asking me about. Which spelling of the suffix shun is the most frequently used? You can't see everybody, can you, Donna? I want you to write down in whether you think it's T-I-O-N, S-I-O-N, or I-O-N. What do you think, Donna? Which one do you think is the most? I can hear you.
I think I'm going to say I-O-N.
I-O-N. And you would be correct.
Really?
Yes.
Sweet.
Let me tell you why. Okay. I created the affixo chart in 1983 too. The middle has a base word or a root. And we have places for prefixes and places for suffixes. Okay. If you think of act, people think because they see T-I-O-N together that it's shun, but the base word is act. So the suffix is shun. In creation, it's the same thing. The E gets dropped. So you see C-R-E-A-T-I-O-N. And kids want to read it as create, well, still read it as creation with that. But the E is dropped, so it's I-O-N. Relation, the E is dropped, it's I-O-N. How about in misinformation? This is a verb suffix, and it was 8. So we drop the E and add I-O-N. Opinion, the base is opine, opine. You drop the E, it's I-O-N. This happens a lot. So by teaching about roots, you need to teach about roots and bases and word structure when as you're teaching about this suffix. In the word legion, L-E-G is a root that means to collect or gather, and I-O-N is the suffix. So that is the most frequent used spelling of that. Okay, gotta go. This is from my book. You see it's on 173. It's called A Suffix of Rebellion, Tension, and Deception, Coping with I-O-N, S-I-O-N, and T-I-O-N. And explains here the tutorial. This is what the teacher needs to know to be able to teach the lesson. This is what you say to the kids. This explains how to map it. And I give examples of every mapping. So these are the I-O-N spell charts, the S-I-O-N and the T-I-O-N. Yeah, the T-I-O-N. This is actually not correct. Yeah, there's very few in this use. This needs to be fixed. But okay, so as you know, I switched publishers recently to Really Great Reading, and I cannot say enough about them. They are amazing. Scott and his wife, the owners were former teachers, and they really believe in what they do. And I'm sorry that it took so long to get my book out, but I needed to get my files back, and then we had to go through and make some changes, and I just missed that one on the shun, so that'll have to be fixed. But somebody asked me how many changes are in that. This is not the new edition. I didn't redo it. I'm working on that now. This was just to be able to get it out to you quickly because so many people were waiting for it. So this is a copy of the 11 edits, and most of them are, whoops, I don't know what that is. There's a mistake there. Most of them are just typos, or I updated the research. You know, there's nothing big in there in terms of mapping some new principles I hadn't before. Those will be forthcoming in the book. Okay, so I want to thank you for coming to the webinar, and I hope you enjoyed the mapping madness. And I also want to take this time, no matter where you are in the world, my 3 little grandchildren are in Namibia right now. And I want to thank you for everything you do day in and day out for your students during this unprecedented time. You are all champions, learning to teach remotely on top of learning all kinds of new knowledge, and I commend you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure from the hearts of others. So,
wonderful. Thank you, Kathryn. That was fabulous. Do you have time to stay on and answer some questions?
yes.
Okay, here we go. When OR is in the middle, is in the initial, medial, or final position of a word, it is mapped in one sound box. Why is OR mapped in 2 boxes in words like core, SoR, and chore? Is it making the same
It's
sound?
not. Oh, it is because it's not. In chore, and that would be ch, or it's 2 sounds. The CH is in one box. The ORE is in a second box with the E crossed out.
Okay,
Well, where did she get that from my book?
I don't know. I don't think so.
That's wrong if it's in
Now,
there.
if you want to look at the questions so you can
Yeah,
understand them better, go to
and
the,
I guess I want to know if they're relating to my book or somebody taught them how to map something differently.
probably. So go to Q&A and then you can see it, because it's always easier to read it yourself.
Okay.
We have 2 participants who raised their hands. Let's see what we got here. Brooke,
Rebecca, if you could type and tell me where you got that. I don't believe that I've done that in my book. If I did, it's a typo.
All right, Mandy, you want to talk?
I didn't ask the question.
It's
Okay.
Rebecca Goglia.
Your hand was up.
Okay. Does Mandy?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Mandy. Do you have a question?
Actually, I was going to ask about the ION, which I completely understand ION being the unit because of the meaning, but how do you explain that TION has the shun sound?
TI goes in one box.
Okay.
The O is a schwa in another box, and the N is another box.
Okay. So okay. All right. I understand that then. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay, when learning some OG methodologies, 2 to 3 letter blends are taught as one unit. When tapping fingers, stretching, phoneme graphing, mapping, is this adjustment permitted when using Kathryn's book resource for implementation?
I don't understand why a blend is being taught as one unit, because there's more than one sound in it.
Yep. I agree.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay, because if you're doing speech to print, it's got to be broken down, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way to understand how to balance the whole class lessons, small group and individual lessons? How can you manage this with differentiation?
Okay. When I was teaching in the public school, we had what was called a learning lab. And we tested our kids with this decoding inventory that we created on syllable types. And we always found out that we had some kids who were really good readers and not very good spellers that just missed somehow a way to attack the words and might just need to be in a group temporarily. We had children that needed more intensive help, so they it was very important that they got in the classroom what they were also getting in the resource room. So I helped develop a syllable-based spelling program for the classroom that the first lesson of every week was a phoneme grapheme mapping the pattern that they were working on. So we differentiated with spelling groups and did more phoneme grapheme mapping with the kids that were on the lower level than the kids necessarily on the higher level. And for the kids who didn't need spelling at all, then they got morphology. So you can use the parts of the book. I mean, I did not do whole class spelling. Our teachers didn't do whole class spelling, and we did push in. I don't know if you have a special ed teacher who pushes in for spelling, but I think the biggest way to make it work is if the people who are working with you all have the common knowledge and common language around syllables and phoneme grapheme mapping, so you can split the kids in the classroom with a group. Or if you are managing 3 to 4 groups yourself in a classroom, you would make sure that you spend the most time with the kids who were at the beginning levels. And sometimes I would introduce the spelling list, for example, would be one list on closed syllables, for example. And there might be 5 words. And there's an example of it actually in my book, where 5 words would be 1 syllable closed syllable words. 5 words would be 2 syllable closed syllable words. The next list would be 3, and then the next one might be closed syllable words with suffixes. And then you could teach the whole class the lesson on closed syllables, but then differentiate the list. So Johnny might get words 1 through 10, Sarah might get 6 through 15, so-and-so might get, and you got extra credit if you wanted to learn more than the ones you were assigned. And more often than not, kids would try to look to learn them all, and by the end of the year, oftentimes I didn't even have to assign them, they would do that. So there are ways around it, and I do give examples of it in the back of the book. There's some spelling lists with activities and how to run that. Does that help?
We are actually out of time. But what I would suggest is that unless anyone wants to stay on and have Kathryn answer these for you, she now has her Facebook page, and I think that will be amazing because she'll be able to answer some of your questions directly, because Kathryn will be monitoring that, right?
Yes.
So I think it's a great opportunity for you as users of her book, and just in general questions, she'll be able to answer those for you. So again, the Facebook page is called, you want to go to the first slide, Kathryn?
Mm-hmm. We got to get up
Called
there.
Phoneme Grapheme Mapping.
I think I did it on the end of the slides. The second.
Phoneme Grapheme Mapping with Kathryn E.S. Grace, creator and author.
Yep, there's the Facebook page right there.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
I just
everyone.
wanted to, I just want to remind people that I do not mind you using some of my materials with your students, but I did have a disclosure on the front page I wanted to remind people of, because that no part of the presentation or its contents can be replicated, reproduced, or adapted for commercial gain without permission from myself or my editor. My publisher, because too often than not, some of my things have ended up on Teachers Pay Teachers and other websites, and they haven't been done correctly. And that is a reflection on me and a reflection on my program when they use the name of my program and it's not done correctly. So I hope you understand that.
Yep, totally agree. Just a reminder, this recording will be sent to you because you are a registered member of this group, of this presentation, and also the copy to the PowerPoint. So you'll get the recording and the PowerPoint tonight if we can upload it, tomorrow at the latest. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Thank you.